Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leslie Oliver, and I'm the EDI specialist with the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Welcome to our next session in the Black History Month speaker series. We are so excited to welcome Robert Small to Western and London. Before we begin with introductions, I would like to make you aware of some of the resources available to attendees. The closed captions have been enabled. You can access the captions by hitting the CC button in your control bar. The chat function has been disabled for this event. If you have a question, please submit it in the Q&A tab in your control options, and we will review them at the end. Lastly, we would like to remind all student, staff, and faculty members at Western to complete the Western Equity Census. Beginning in October of 2021, the Western Equity Census is the first ever comprehensive demographic survey for all staff, students, and faculty. This will help us to understand the demographics of the university, enhance the support of diversity and equity in our community. The census, which is voluntary and confidential, takes less than 5 minutes to complete. It's available online through my Human Resources for employees and Student Center for students. To learn more, visit the links provided in the chat. And we will now begin with a land acknowledgement offered by Ramon Brown.
We acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lempuwak, and Chonongton nations on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. With this, we respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land, as they are the original caretakers. We acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit endure in Canada, and we accept responsibility as a public institution to contribute towards revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing meaningful relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching, research, and community service.
Thank you, Ramon. Now we welcome Sohaila Esfahani from the Department of Visual Arts at Western to introduce our very special guest speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sohaila Esfahani. I'm an assistant professor of visual arts. My research and art practice explores the trends of cultural translation and investigates the processes involved in cultural transfer and transformation. On behalf of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and the Department of Visual Arts, I would like to introduce our 5th speaker as part of the Black History Month speaker series at Western University, Robert Small. This is his first presentation to the Western community, and today he will share with us his talk titled Highlighting African Canadian History Through Art and Technology. Robert Small has revolutionized the celebration of Black History Month in Canada through his art. For over a quarter of a decade, Small's art has been featured in a poster he creates called Legacy. Distributed annually, the poster has educated millions about the history, contributions, and accomplishments of African Canadians. Small is a self-taught artist who has merged his artistic talent, skills as an entrepreneur, and teaching degree to demonstrate the power of art and conviction. Small graduated from the University of Windsor with a degree in sociology and criminology, and in 2017, he attended York University, where he obtained his teaching degree. He is also the proud father of 2 girls. Over the years, Small has made many historical accomplishments, among the greatest being his recent induction into the Order of Canada as a member. As one of the youngest African Canadians to ever receive this honor, and the only and first African Canadian visual artist to do so, Small continues to build on his historical significance to the African Canadian community. In 2022, Small doesn't plan to slow his innovative momentum as he prepares to launch Afrotastic, the first online trivia game focusing on African Canadian history. In both 2007 and 2021, Small's artwork was displayed in banks across the country, and he is the only African Canadian artist to accomplish this. For over 10 years, his art has been featured on the side of a building in downtown Toronto. In an area of success being measured by visibility on social platforms, Small maintains a vibrant presence there, as well with media clips on major television outlets that have been viewed over 100,000 times. Throughout his career, Small has been interviewed by such major media outlets as the Toronto Star, the Toronto Sun, CBC, City TV, and Rogers. With all of these accomplishments, Small's artwork has even permeated the transit system in Toronto by being displayed as part of an anti-racism campaign in over 20 subway stations. Along with these accomplishments, Small's artwork continues to be the centerpiece of Black History Month celebrations by appearing in thousands of schools across the country. Small will be historically remembered as the most significant visual artist of the last 2 decades, and the future offers more accomplishments to come. What makes Small a Black entrepreneur to watch in the future is his merging of art, education, Black history, and technological advancement. Small has ambitions to create Black history-oriented Alexa skills and expand on his catalog of Afrocentric activity books for children. The future offers Small boundless opportunities for his limitless ability. He is also an incredibly popular speaker during Black History Month. On behalf of Western University and London community, I would like to welcome you, Robert.
Hi, thanks for that great introduction. I'm really glad to be here. So I'd like to start off the presentation. As you had mentioned, I'm going to be talking to you about uplifting ourselves in innovation through arts and technology. But before I get into the crux of it, I'm also going to take you on exploration of both becoming knowledgeable about Black history, as well as acknowledging the reasoning behind Black history. Because oftentimes we think of Black history similar to Valentine's Day or Christmas, and we assume what the intention is, but do we know what the intention is? And so consequently, I'd like to, during my presentation, I'd also like to talk to you about how Black History Month came into being, and to discuss why we need to celebrate it, and why, as African Canadians, and I say African Canadians, sometimes I'll say African Canadians rather than Black, because when I say African Canadian, it connotes a place and it quotes a heritage. Whereas with Black, yes, we use it socially, but if I ask all the people on this Zoom, what does Black really mean? We come up with different interpretations of that. Whereas when I say African Canadian, my experience as an African person, yes, has brought me to Barbados, where my parents were born, but my origins originate in Africa, and I'm of African descent, and I'm in Canada. If I'm directly from the continent of Africa, I'm an African who was born on the continent, and I'm in Canada. So the same term applies, whether it's in my experience as someone who was born here or someone that was directly from the continent of Africa. So I'm really glad for all of you to be here, and I'm going to start my presentation. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and I'll gladly look at them and be able to answer them throughout my presentation. And I'm going to start right now. And the big question is, the one question that you're not expecting me to ask straight out the gate is that, do you know 2 + 2? And the reason I'm asking that is because often I'm sure that there's many people who do know that. But when I ask the other question that's important, do you know who created Black History Month, right? And I'm going to reveal that question very soon. But when we think about the higher learning that we're obtaining at universities, at colleges, even with respect to any type of learning that you're undertaking, you're at university right now, and many people of African descent, such as myself, I'm not taking myself out of it, got to university and they didn't know the basic question of do you know who started Black History Month? And we have to question, when we get into higher learning, we're here to develop analytical skills. When I went to university, that's when my analytical skills started developing about the education that I was getting, as well as the education that I got in high school. So consequently, the first question that I'll ask you is, yes, do you know about 2 + 2? Because that was seen as something fundamental that you need to know. But why is it that you're in the university and you still don't know who started Black History Month? That is essential for your self-esteem and is essential for you going forward. I'm going to talk about that further. And the person who did create Black History Month was a man by the name of Carter G. Woodson. And Carter G. Woodson was a scholar, he was an academic, and he was African-American who thought that the contributions of African people were not being recognized on a global scale, let alone in North America. So in 1826, he decided to do something about it. And what he did is that he created a week that he entitled Negro History Week. And that for that week, what he intended was that he wanted people to come together and learn about the contributions of African people, and then spend the rest of the year finding out more information about people of African descent and their history. So no, the intention was not for some magical button to be pressed up in the sky at February 1st, and you're supposed to start learning about Black history. And then February 28th, someone else comes and hits that button promptly at 11:59, and you're supposed to end talking about Black History Month. The intention was for you to study it all year round and merely come together during that week to discuss, like we're doing now, about what you've accomplished throughout the whole week, throughout the whole year during that week. So when people tell you that we only have a month, you have a year to figure out what you're going to talk about next year. So consequently, with respect to innovation, and this is the era that you're living in, of compelling people to innovate and create. And that's why creators, the word creators is such a valuable term, because that is a challenge that's posed to you as Black students, and it's posed to the professors and the university that you attend to make you competitive when you enter the workforce, when this magical ride of university is over. There's a part of me that wishes that I was in your shoes, but hey, my time is gone, but your time is still presently here. And the one thing that I want to talk about that's often that to make this presentation in sync with the times and everything, an ongoing discussion. And I'm going to use a word that's I'm only going to use once and then leave it aside. But I'm just to prove my point. The one thing about Carter G. Woodson is that he felt that the Negro, when he says Negro, he means Black, and he means African people of African descent, that he felt the Negro was miseducated where it comes to the educational system. And that once they're educated in this negative way, that they won't be able to I'm just going back to that they won't really be able to know who they are, and that they can easily be left astray. So that's why at the bottom, when I'm doing this story time with Robert Small, part 2 is I'm going to talk to you about a fictional tale about my 2 kids' idiotic idiocy. My girls are not named this. I'm making the story up, by the way. Okay, just to make that clear. That imagine if I was in secondary school, and I had a friend Mike, and Mike, I didn't like Mike. I really couldn't stand him actually. So instead of calling him Mike, I changed his name to Idiot. When we would be walking to the park, I'd say, hey, idiot, are you coming with us? When we were going to a party, I'd refer to him as, hey, idiot, are you coming or what? You know, like, we're going now. So for 2 years straight, Mark was never his name. I called him idiot. Consequently, in this fictional story, I leave university. I leave secondary school. I no longer talk to Mike. Then I'm walking down London, Ontario, you know, just on the street. I see Mike. I go, hey, Mike, what's going on? And Mike looks at me puzzled. And Mike says to me, Rob, Mike, you know my name's not Mike. And I go, and I look at him puzzled, and I go, what's your name? And he goes, idiot, remember? So, okay. And I feel embarrassed about how I treated Mike and what I referred to him. But Mike has taken on the name. And he goes, you know what? Yeah, it's me, idiot. You remember me, idiot? And, you know, yeah, oh yeah, by the way, here's my 2 kids, idiotic and idiocy. And I look at that and I think about what Mike has done. And when you start questioning it, what have I done to Mike when I was 18 years old? I've like brainwashed him into thinking that the term idiot was actually a pet name that he should adopt. And worse, that Michael's not only taken on that name, but he has increasingly passed that on to another generation and made them feel that the term idiot is something that they should call themselves. So now, that's a fictional story. But when we think about the term nigger, and people like calling themselves that within our Black community, can you really tell me what the difference is? At one time, you were called, Black people and myself were called Negro. Then they were called Black. And then in a derogatory way, they were called the N-word. So consequently, during this whole presentation, there are some things, unfortunately, that if you read your books about Black history, and with respect to Carter G. Woodson actually predicted that people that do not know their history are doomed to repeat it, and they're susceptible for arguments that denigrate their being, you know. So with respect to the use of that term and everything, and people within the Black community actually adopting it and calling themselves it affectionately, there's no difference between that and me calling Mike an idiot and seeing him actually passing it down to his children that they should replicate that. So when I talk to you about my art, it's not, you know, when artists create artwork, it's not merely that they just start painting and some glorious thing erupts out of the blue. Even though I went to university, I went to the University of Windsor, I graduated with a degree in sociology and criminology. I went back to university and I studied and I got my teacher's degree in 2014. But yet I'm creating educational material that's primarily aimed at the African Canadian population, but also for Canadian society in general. But the beliefs that I have throughout this presentation impact my art in a crucial way, because all the things that I'm talking to you about right now, I put into my art to make myself unique. And with respect to the world that you're entering into after you graduate university, it's important that you look at yourself as an individual, because people get paid by their uniqueness, not by how general they are. The more specific you are, the more money that you're going to get, and the more valuable you're going to be in the job market. And consequently, you know, with respect to what I do, my uniqueness makes me a compelling figure on the job market, even though I'm not doing anything directly related to my studies at university. But the bottom line is, you have to merge your talents, your education, into making yourself a unique individual. And when we go back, and so consequently, I touched upon some of these, but this slide is purely for me, because I've been creating this poster for 28 years. And the one thing that I always hear during Black History Month that I'm sick of is that, oh, it's the shortest month of the year, and I don't have to concentrate on it because I'm Black all year. And why is it that we have to have a month? And oh boy, Black History Month, we're all going to talk about slavery again. You know, well, with respect to a lot of these things that people mention, the fact of the matter is that if you're planning for something and you a year in advance and you have 28 days to accomplish it, you really don't need 3 days more. So consequently, you're given something that a lot of other ethnic groups do not have, and that is a whole month to talk about Black History Month. And with respect to selling my poster, I'm glad that I have 28 days to do it, and 28 days to basically throw a big rock into a pond and see the ripple effects throughout the whole year, rather than having no day at all. You know, with respect to being Black all year, oftentimes people, just because they're Black, they anticipate that they know everything about Black history, or they know enough. And when you quiz them about what they know about Black History Month, oftentimes it's very little. And just because you're a Black person doesn't mean that there was an encyclopedia or a Google that was implanted into the side of your arm that you can rally up any type of aspect of Black history that you need. You need to be educated about the history of Black people and Black people around the world, because it's crucial for your self-esteem and especially for your children that you have in the future, because you can only teach them what you know, and if you don't know a lot, you're not going to be able to teach them a lot either. You know, and many of us need to know, one, about Black history around the world, but two, most importantly, the history of the countries that our parents came from, because Jamaica, Barbados is not just about the food. It's not just about calypso or reggae, but it's about the struggles of the Maroons that occurred in Jamaica. Do you know their story? If you're from Barbados, there's the Buster Rebellion in Barbados. Do you know that person's story? When you talk about slavery, yes, you know what you were taught in secondary school and primary school, but did they ever mention to you that there was rebellions in Africa, that the enslaved Africans fought their captors on the shores of Africa? Did they ever tell you when you were in primary school or secondary school that the rebellions continued on the ocean, covering the Middle Passage? That there are slaves that jumped into the oceans and tried swimming back to Africa rather than succumb to their enslavement in North America? Did they tell you the rebellions that occurred on those ships, where some slaves turned those ships around, and of the ship that arrived in North America with just Africans at the helm of it because they were successful in their rebellion? Did they ever tell you about the Buster or Maroon rebellions in the Caribbean and the other rebellions in the Caribbean, or the rebellion of over 400 rebellions that occurred in North America? And specifically, you being in Canada, did they tell you about Mary Joseph Angelique, an enslaved African woman who was tortured and killed because they accused her of actually setting fire to half of Montreal to hide her escape? These are stories that, while you think you know about even slavery, you are not told about these rebellions. Because if you were growing up, you would have thought about the slavery experience differently. You would have been empowered to know that these African slaves fought their oppressor, that they did not just humbly come to board the ships and do nothing. And that is how we were taught, and how we were misled. So consequently, with respect to my art and going back to it, you know, these stories and knowing the truth about our history oftentimes is what empowers me to continue doing my poster for 28 years. Because every year I feel compelled to tell more aspects of our history, to unwind the damage that a lot of us have occurred to us while we were in post-secondary as well as university. And the one thing that you don't know is that, hey, Jean Augustine, who was actually a politician in Etobicoke Lakeshore, that she actually got Black History Month to be celebrated in Canada. And she got it to be celebrated in Canada formally because she went to the federal parliament as a member of parliament and got the other members to get the Canadian government at the time to get Black History Month recognized as formally across Canada. And ever since 1995, that's how it's been. And once again, you know, with Black History Month, it's really a time for all of us to be empowered. It's time for us to educate ourselves about who we are and our different perspectives about things. You know, it's also should be seen as a time for us to unite as we are now. And especially within the African Canadian community, it is a time for us to boost their self-esteem. Because bottom line, me understanding a lot about African history, me reading up on Carter G. Woodson and thinking about my own past, it has put me definitely on the path to wondering, do I really know who I am? And that's the question that I ask myself ongoing for the last 20 years, because it's an ongoing path. But in addition, that's what I want to ask you. Do you really know who you are? And my path to figure out who I am started here, right? Feels kind of odd for a Black guy to be putting up a picture of the Justice League, but hey, you know, I'll explain it to you. The one thing about my artwork and how it started is I originally wanted to become a comic book artist, and my ambitions was to go to New York City and become a comic book artist and draw Spider-Man fighting the Green Goblin or Superman fighting Lex Luthor. And the last thing in my mind at the time was that eventually that I was going to actually be doing a poster featuring Black people. That was the farthest thing from my mind at the time. But the thing about it is, when I started my artistic journey, that was doing this, drawing Superman and Batman and such and Wonder Woman was actually the beginning of what I would come to be. Because it's the same way that I read a comic book, looked at a picture of Superman fighting Bizarro, and I tried duplicating that by looking at the picture and then drawing on this side. That was actually teaching me how to look at something and actually duplicate what I see. So the same way that I was drawing Superman here and drawing him on this side, is the same way in the future that I would have a picture of Gene Augustine, look at it and look at the details and be able to duplicate what I see. So if my 10-year-old self never was so interested in comic books and had those aspirations of becoming comic book artists, and consequently didn't develop the ability to look at what he's seen, I wouldn't be here today. But the other aspect with respect to these superheroes is that, yeah, when I was 10 years old, I used to pretend that I was Superman. I would put a red towel around my neck, and I'd like have as much blue tights as I could possibly can, or blue shirt at the very least, and like try jumping up in the air and like willing myself to fly. And I probably levitated for about 5 or 6 seconds. Every time I tell the story, I increase that time to about 10, and I was up in the air, 5 feet up, right? But the bottom line is that the one thing about Superman that prevented me from thinking that I was invincible, thinking that nothing can touch me, thinking that I could fly, the one thing, no matter how many times I put that towel around my neck, no matter how many times I put a blue shirt on, I was not white like Superman. And that was the one thing that kept me from thinking that I was Superman. I was perpetually kept here, but there was another level from me thinking that I was a Superman, because Superman looked like that and I did not look like that. The same way when I phrase the term Wonder Woman, what does a Wonder Woman look like when in the culture, Wonder Woman does not look like my mother, does not look like my aunt, does not look my daughters could not aspire to look like Wonder Woman, because there's one critical element missing. They are not white. So consequently, even though the creators of these characters We're not trying to impede the self-esteem of Black youth or any other minority. That is unfortunately the result unconsciously, right? But the one thing that could have been done, and that's why I will tell you that art, as well as art, what we create as artists, as well as representation, that matters. Because my self-esteem would have been totally different if Superman, Wonder Woman, and the Justice League actually look like this. If they look like this, then those barriers to my creativity and my thinking that I can jump over a building in a single bound, that bullets can bounce off of my chest, wouldn't have that restriction with respect to my complexion, right? That I would think that a Wonder Woman looks like my mother, looks like my aunt, looks like any woman that I possibly marry in the future, that she is also a Wonder Woman because a Wonder Woman looks like her. And that she cannot possibly have a Superman because Superman actually looks similar to her husband or her boyfriend or her son, is capable of doing that. So once again, with respect to art and representation and Black history, we all have to converge those things to make something powerful, to boost the self-esteem of one, the African Canadian community, but also to encourage others to think of us differently. Because imagine how my self-esteem or your self-esteem would have been if you seen an image that looked like this when you're 5, then again when you're 10, then you're 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 45. That's over 40 years of subliminal messages that a Black person can be powerful, that a Black woman is indeed a Wonder Woman. That's 40 years of being told that. And this is only one image, let alone the other images in society. But when these images are not of your complexion, it's sending you the subliminal message that you are not a Wonder Woman because a Wonder Woman does not share your complexion. You are not a Superman because they don't share your complexion. So consequently, you have to use your university education and your skills as an artist to change the narrative that has subjected so many of us to be thinking negatively about our history and consequently of ourselves. So once again, I ask the question and you think about it: do you really know who you are? And my path to knowing myself went through a lot of my imaginary things. When I was younger and seeing Lieutenant Uhura on the Starship Enterprise, and I was thinking, man, she was really good looking and everything like that. But in addition to that, she was powerful. She was in a leadership position. And once again, she was the first Black woman to have a role on a TV show that was not in a subordinate position. So that image to me growing up was important. But consequently, there are other images that come into the forefront that are important for Black youth as well as people from other minority groups to see. And that was like Captain Benjamin Sisko in the middle. And he was the first Black male to be the captain of a starship and the only parent of his son. Then now there's Captain Michael, who's on this television show Star Trek Discovery, and she is the first Black female to be the captain of a starship. And once again, people say, well, what's the big deal? That's just fictional characters and everything like that. Well, those fictional things in Star Trek cause this to be in front of you. Because if you ask your parents and as well as your professors, when they were watching the original Star Trek, they never thought that they would ever be able to pick up an object like this and talk to somebody, let alone a flat screen TV. So when people are given images positively of themselves, they aspire towards those images. It pushes them forward. So that's why it's important as artists and creators for us to create images that are powerful and that speak to a future that includes us. And the most vibrant example of that is the most recent Black Panther movie, where it was a merger of Black people and the future and technology and our culture to make us proud and to envision ourselves as being part of the future and not merely just being along for the ride into the future. And once again, I end my comic book analogies here, because once again, even though within the Black community, we watch a lot of TV and watch a lot of movies, you know, that necessarily isn't a bad thing if we look at some of these characters and we adopt some of the things that they epitomize into our lives. So if we're watching Storm in the X-Men, and Storm is a character that can summon up the elements, that she can summon up the wind, the rain and such, we should, once we put that comic book down, we stop watching a movie, that we have to think of ourselves as powerful as Storm within our own lives, and how can we control the negative elements that are around us and focus the positive elements around us into creating a sunny day the same way that Storm has the ability to. If we look at Okoye, who was a character in the Black Panther movies and a character in the Black Panther comic strips, we can create characters that epitomize Black female leadership. And for us not to be afraid of those Black female who are leaders, but see it as a different form of leadership. And for Black females themselves, not to feel that they have to quell any demonstration of who they are. And for Black men such as myself, to not be afraid of that Black female leadership and thinking that's something that compromises our manhood. Because I'll tell you, brothers, if you feel compromised by that type of leadership, something's up with you. There's nothing wrong with her, nothing up with her, right? And with regard to Cyborg, he can summon and gather together any type of technology and create it. And the one thing that we should learn from that is that rather than being consumers of technology, you know, hey, I love my daughters, but they bug me every day for the latest iPhone, and they want to get an iPhone just because it's a new year. So consequently, the one thing that we should do is that we should take our interest in technology and motivate them to be producers of technology and not just mere consumers, right? And that's extremely important, given that the careers that would be paying the most in the future relate to STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. So consequently, that is where things are going. And even with myself, I have to be part of the future by constantly innovating my art and recreating it in different ways. And that's what I'm trying to do now with respect to this poster. This is a poster I created. I've been creating posters for 28 years. So I'm definitely the old guy in the room now. I can't deny that. But with respect to this poster, even though the idea of a poster itself is a pretty ancient idea, I'd be the first one to admit that. But the one thing about ideas is that we can innovate around them, recreate them, and make them relevant, and make these ideas relevant to the present day. And that's what I tried doing with this poster here. This poster that will be displayed at the University of Western throughout Black History Month, throughout the whole year, you know, is interactive, because if you go up to it and you scan any of the QR codes, it will take you to the websites of the people that are profiled here. And the one thing, given the pandemic and the issues that have come forward from the pandemic, the one thing that I was definitely interested in is creating a poster where Black people are thinking about the future, and it compels them to think about the future. So consequently, that's why you see the landscape in the background, and it's showing a futuristic city as well as the robot, to think about what our role will be in the future, how our art will take shape in the future, and just as a community to be forward thinking and to think about not only one, how can I get ahead, but in addition, how can our community get ahead with my or your assistance, especially when you're going to be graduating from university. Your community needs you more than ever. And there's never any escape from being the same way that you're Black all year, you're going to be Black for the rest of your life. And consequently, we need allies like the University of Western has demonstrated. But in addition, we need Black people like yourselves to take up the mantle and carry it when your parents, as well as myself, could no longer do it and be successful at it. So I'm going to tell you about the people that I profiled in this poster here. With respect to art, Dominic Denieri, she's a visual artist, but she's prominently known as a sculptor. And she creates different sculptures, and she has on display both in Ottawa as well as across Canada. With respect to technology, there's Claudette McGowan. And Claudette McGowan, she's a cybersecurity expert. She's also the CEO at TD Bank and has been a CEO at the Bank of Montreal as well. And one more important thing, when we touch upon technology, she owns a facility in Aurora, Ontario, where they create robots, and she personally creates robots along with her husband, as well as anything to do with technology. So the one thing when I've talked to Claudette late at night sometimes, she's would inform me that you can't talk to me long because there's been a cyber attack. And if people only knew how many cyber attacks occurred on a daily basis, they'd be surprised about what is going on around them. So consequently, with the African Canadian community, we need to be involved with technology to be knowledgeable about inventions within technology and how it's going to impact our community and as a result, us. With respect to Sharon Davis Murdoch, she is actually a social justice champion in healthcare and public policy, and she still remain active in the Black community that she's in Nova Scotia, that she's been involved with for several years, if not over 2 decades. Now, the men that I profiled here, I'm going to mention all 3 of them. One of them is Isaac Olafey Jr., and he's a real estate developer, and he's also created different homes, residential homes, as well as businesses. He owns a boutique hotel by the Toronto airport. So consequently, his importance in the African community is really vital with respect to demonstrating what we can accomplish. He often talks about generational wealth, and that is a message that he brings to the Black community. Then there's Ananda Lolole, and he is a strong advocate with respect to food and social justice. He's a food security advocate. And once again, people ponder, what does food security even mean? Does that mean that my Uber Eats, make sure that my Uber Eats gets to me hot? Well, it definitely isn't. It's basically talking about the fact that there are people in society and within the African Canadian community who do not have access to affordable food, nutritional food, and nutritional, affordable, and accessible to nutritional food as well. When I took my daughter one time, several years ago, to a camp in Scarborough, and a friend of mine was actually the head of that camp, but he started encouraging me, why don't you bring your daughter over to my camp? It'll be fun. So even though I lived in Ajax at the time, I brought my daughter to that camp for a week. And after the camp, I asked her, how did it go? How did you like it and stuff? And she went and she told me, yeah, I liked it and everything. The kids were cool, but there was one thing that was odd. And I go, well, what was odd about it? And she goes, yeah, well, for lunch, you would send me there with chicken wings or roti or something like that. And every time I opened up my lunch I had, all the kids would start gathering around me. And I said, well, why would they do that? And they go, well, because the majority of them came to lunch with they came to camp with 2 bags of popcorn, and that was their lunch. And I said, oh, okay. And even though coming from a middle class, like my Black middle class background, it was odd to me. But the one thing about doing work in the Black community, you have to realize that not every Black person lives like you, and that there's segments of the Black community and segments of the community in general that live different lives than we do. So consequently, when I started learning about that and learning more about food security, I started realizing that I've come into contact with food, the issue of food insecurity, more frequently than I would like to think of in my experiences, both personally as well as in the Black community. And Komi Alof, he's a poet, he's also an architectural designer, and he's a leader in Afrofuturistic art. And when I talk about Afrofuturistic art, that is art that projects Black people into the future and use our culture as well as our history as a template to create that artwork. And I'm not an Afrofuturistic artist. That's why I got Komi to actually put that image that you've seen in the poster in the middle of the poster. You know, and consequently, even though we're artists, doesn't mean that we can't innovate and get allies and get corporations to support us. So consequently, with the help of the Bank of Montreal, even though they sponsored my poster and other initiatives I'm doing and will do in the future, they also sponsored this mini poster, and I'm distributing this across Canada the same way that the Bank of Montreal put this version of my poster in every branch across Canada. And that happened this year, but also happened in 2007. And the Bank of Montreal made the commitment to me that they'll be doing it for another 3 years. So with respect to art, there's different things that we can do with our art to make a powerful impression. The same way that I hope that I made a powerful impression with this piece of art that I created, featuring various African men of African descent and the powerful impact that they've had on society. Such people as Nelson Mandela, who was the president of South Africa, but more importantly, that he was a revolutionary in South Africa in overturning apartheid. Very important in overturning apartheid. Then we have to look at the historical significance of Bob Marley. Yes, we can listen to his music, but more importantly, we have to think about the message that he was trying to convey of resistance, of fighting white supremacy, of fighting the indoctrination of African people into thinking that they were inferior, right? And especially resistance when we have to chase those crazy bald heads out of town. I won't even attempt to try singing it. Definitely not. I'm so bored in Canada, right? But with regard to other important figures, there's Malcolm X, who was the leader of the Nation of Islam, and talked to us about who made you hate yourself, made you hate your broad nose or your thick lips, and a lot of his speeches touch upon not only talking about the effects of racism such, but predominantly the effect that it has on the mentality of African people worldwide. And then there was Marcus Garvey, who was also of Jamaican descent, who thought of Black nationalism. So prior to the Black Lives Matter talking about the need for Black businesses to be supported, and for both the community as well as Black people themselves to support Black businesses, Marcus Garvey taught Black nationalism, which basically is the exact same thing, that Black people should do commerce with themselves. And that is not some revolutionary thought that we should hide in everything. Every community does that. So consequently, that should not be something that anyone should be afraid of talking about, because that is just the thing that everybody does. And when we talk about employment, upping the employment in the Black community, the reason that unemployment is so high in the Black community is because we don't have Black people that can employ other Black people. And that is why the employment rate is higher in other communities, because they know that only they will employ directly their people. And when I say their people, once again, that's not some revolutionary thing either. That means your family members are your people, right? Are the people, So consequently, if your mother or father owns a business, who are they more apt to employ immediately? Their kids. After their kids, who are they going to ask to join the family business? Other family members or their friends, who are most likely going to be of the same complexion. So consequently, with respect to Black History Month, it's not only for me to come on this on the Zoom to talk to you about what Martin Luther King or Malcolm X accomplished, but it's also to give you the courage to think about making history yourself. The same way that when I was 5 years old, I never thought that I'd be doing a Zoom for 1 hour talking about myself, but here I am and here I go, because there's many more things in the future that I'm going to be focusing on, and I want you to feel as exhilarated about Black History Month as I do every year. And I feel exhilarated about Black History Month every year because every year I'm able to showcase these posters and talk about them as adamantly as I did when I first made them. And specifically when I'm talking about the slavery experience, you can use art as a way to convey a message constantly and to demonstrate your own political beliefs. So with respect to myself, the one thing that, even though I have issues with how the school system taught me about the slavery experience, that didn't stop me from utilizing my talents and my education that I gained at university to make a difference for both my own people, but also for Canadian society in general. So consequently, this painting that I created with oil paint is actually called However Long the Night, the Dawn Shall Break. So it talks about the slavery experience and how that the Africans fought their enslavers. And consequently, that's why there's a ship burning in the background on the left-hand side. And also when I talk to you about how that there are African people who fought their oppressors and actually tried swimming back to Africa, that's why you see a chain on the shores in the bottom left-hand corner that's open, symbolizing that one of those Africans was successful in swimming from that ship that's burning in the background and making it to the shores where they are now. So consequently, with respect to your art or any book that you create or anything that you do in your professional endeavors moving forward, you have the ability to make a difference. And that's what I tried doing, because this is a poster that I created 3 years ago, celebrating my 25th year doing these posters. And I entitled this poster The Yearbook. And the reason I entitled it The Yearbook was basically to celebrate the fact that I graduated to a certain extent, making it 25 years doing this poster, but in addition to celebrating the individual stories, the over 100 stories of African Canadians that I featured every year for doing this poster. So consequently, this is when I went over the 100 people mark. So consequently, everybody on there I featured in previous posters, and I'm very proud to reach 25. But now at 28, my ambition is to make it a 30 and hopefully the 50. But hopefully there's somebody at the University of Western that will be willing to take it over from me when I reach that 50 year mark, because my Gene Augustine or my Barack Obama might be looking more like Broke Obama, because it doesn't look anything like Barack Obama maybe when I'm 75 or so. So consequently, with respect to creating artwork, it's also important to take off our own blinders. And as a man myself, I can always create posters that predominantly focus on the experience and the excellence of Black men, but that would be doing an injustice to obviously the women that are in my life, as well as my own children, by not focusing purely on the accomplishments of African women around the world, and getting them to think that they can be a Wonder Woman by being like Angela Davis, who is a Wonder Woman that fights against the incarcerations of Black people in the United States and around the world, who was a Black feminist, as well as an advocate for Black power during the Black Power Civil Rights Movement, that there is a Wonder Woman like a Folorancho Lakaji, who was a seamstress, but eventually became the richest woman in the world by owning oil refineries off the coast of Nigeria. Then there was a Wonder Woman who dared to become the leader of Jamaica, and that was Portia Simpson Miller. And she was the second person of African descent to become a leader in the Caribbean. And then there was a fourth Wonder Woman, like Maya Angelou, who was an actress, who was a writer, who wrote several different award-winning books, and passed away with the legacy that her poems were going to be recited during Black History Month and throughout the whole year for decades to come. And with respect to both the Superman as well as the Wonder Woman in our midst, obviously I created this poster to answer that eternal question of who is the greatest of all time. And for those of you who don't know, the term GOAT refers to is an abbreviation for the greatest of all time. So consequently, like I focus on the usual suspects being Muhammad Ali and especially Michael Jordan, but I also think it's important to cross the boundaries of gender and also bring into discussion Jackie Jordan Cursor, who won six gold medals in different competitions with especially track as well as the decathlon. Like, that's an incredible achievement. Or Serena Williams, who was a Grand Slam winner several times over and won several different tournaments. Once again, we have to think about the wonder of the women that are in our community and celebrate it, as well as much as we celebrate the incredible journey of Muhammad Ali and the inspirational journey and the incredible accomplishments of Michael Jordan, who LeBron will never pass. Okay, I'm saying that for the guys in the chat. The guys and women in the chat think different. But the one thing that we definitely need to do is that and going back to what I was telling you about, that we definitely need to innovate, and that also relates to myself. So in conclusion, the lasting question I'm going to ask you, the students of the University of Western, as well as the staff of the University of Western, and the parents that might be watching as well, is that do you know where you're going after this? After you finish university, or even next year, do you know where you're going? And especially, can 20% of your time, or even 10% of your time when you graduate from university, be dedicated to uplifting the Black community? I don't expect you to spend 100% of your time focusing on the uplifting of Black people. But the one thing that Carter G. Woodson says in his book, and I'll read a portion of it to you right now. This was a book that was created over close to 80 years ago. And he stated, and he was talking about African people who pursued upper education at the time. At that time, men went off to school to prepare themselves for the uplift of a downtrodden people. In our time, too many Negroes go to school to memorize certain facts, to pass examinations for jobs. After they obtain these positions, they pay little to no attention to humanity. And unfortunately, that is a situation almost 80 years later that we still find ourselves. So consequently, I'm reading that passage to you to challenge you that after you exit university, not to think about the days that you're in the BSA and cause a rah-rah and irritate your professor and challenge your professor and stuff and talked about Black issues. That was ever a time for only when you were young, right? Because even if you spend 10% of your time and your talents in the future in trying to uplift our race and trying to uplift Black people, if you're an ally, the situation of African Canadian people and African and worldwide will change for the better overnight. So consequently, with this app that I'm calling Afrotastic, that is something that I'm going to be focusing on in the future, and using my art to innovate, as well as my interest in technology. And whichever profession that you undertake when you exit university, I would challenge you to do the same thing that I'm trying to do in order for the betterment of our community. But in addition to that, being an Order of Canada recipient for the betterment of Canada themselves. And with that, I'd like to thank you for coming to hear my presentation, and I'll answer any questions that you have in the chat.
Thanks so much for your engaging presentation, Robert. We've really been looking forward to this presentation since Mars and I first had that initial discussion with you, because the more we talked, the more we discovered about you. And we kept thinking he could talk about this, he could talk about this, but today's talk was perfect. Thank you for highlighting these amazing examples of Black excellence and their impact on Canada as well as the world. So I'm going to turn it over to our colleague, Anna Buller, who's the digital learning specialist with our EDI office, and she's going to go through some of the questions we've received for you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Robert. That was amazing. And in the chat, we can see many comments of how insightful, inspiring, and beautiful your work is. So thank you again for your presentation. And we do have a few questions. So the first one is that you made an analogy about throwing a stone or a rock in the water and making a ripple effect. The question is, have any of those ripple effects returned to you? Have learners who engage with your artwork shared how it impacted them?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, definitely. The reason that compels me to continue doing it after 28 years is because those ripple effects have come back, 5 years later, 10 years later, or even 20 years later. I was on a Zoom with someone from Nova Scotia, and this individual was from Alberta, and after I said, well, is there any questions? She goes, no, this isn't a question. It's a comment, actually. When I was 5 years old, my mother used to get your posters through the Congress of Black Women every year, and she would sit down with me and talk about the individuals that were in your poster. And I'm like shocked that I'm actually on the Zoom with you now and able to tell you 20 years later that thanks for that, right? So consequently, like those type of stories, like continue to compel me to keep on doing this poster. Especially knowing that over my 28 years, that 100,000 posters have gone out there into the multiverse. And when I pass away, that a part of me is still going to be here as if it was when I created that poster, as well as creating a legacy for my own children to continue, and setting a mentality in my family line that their great-grandfather, their grandfather, their great-great-grandfather actually created those posters that are on the wall, So those type of thoughts empower me on, definitely.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, your legacy, I think it's amazing. And I can only imagine the rest of the people who have never said anything to you directly, but still you have had a great impact on them. Another question is, it's coming actually from Weevil. This is outside of the Western community, but I thought it was an interesting question that is related for those students or participants who would like to have a career in this area. Can an artist earn enough money, and does art need to have a message today?
Oh yeah, definitely. One thing I didn't tell you about my story is that when my parents asked me, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? That eternal question when you're 18, even though in the back of my mind I was thinking artist, Rob, tell them that you want to go to New York City and draw comic books, right? By the time the answer came out of my mouth, I said lawyer, right? Because I knew better than to tell my Caribbean parents that I wanted to run off to New York City to draw Spider-Man fighting the Green Goblin, right? Even though for a cover at the time, they used to pay someone $900. And even now, $900 for one picture seems like a lot, but now they probably would pay about $20,000 for a comic book artist to draw one cover, depending on how interesting you are. But it's important with respect to science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. A lot of people refer to it as STEM, but the arts component is being brought into it from the United States, because this cell phone, before this cell phone was made, guess what? Somebody had to draw it. before you put on your dress, guess what? Somebody had to draw it, right? So with respect to many disciplines, somebody has to draw it to show, you know, when a criminal is going to be caught, the first thing when you describe it to the police officer, guess what? Somebody has to draw that guy or that woman, right? So consequently, you know, drawing and the having the ability to draw is a skill that permeates many different disciplines. So one thing that I would implore the students of Western to do is to really innovate and to think about how they can develop their artistic skill or any other skill that they have to you know, catapult them to new heights.
Thank you. Another question is, how did you become successful?
Well, how did I become? Well, I'll tell you right now. You know, so how I became successful. I think that the one thing I can tell you that you can probably take to your own lives is I believed in myself. Right. When I was first doing this poster, I called it the official Black History Month poster, just because I was juiced off of Black empowerment tapes at the time. And I felt, yeah, you know, creating this poster, calling it the official Black History Month poster, our people need to be educated, rah, rah, rah. And, you know, I was really amped about it. And I was giving away for free at the time. And then I said, well, I can't be just some Black Santa Claus. I arrive February 1st and I start throwing out posters to the people, you know, so I decided to sell it. And I decided to sell it for $5 at the time. And people were telling me, no, who's gonna pay you money for a Black History poster? Barely anybody knows when Black History Month is and stuff like that. And I had knocks on my artwork, people telling me that I look cartoonish, that, hey, I know a better artist than you. So consequently, throughout my journey of 28 years, you know, it's basically I had to pull my Superman out of myself and allow those comments to bust off of my chest, rather than feel that there's something that was going to stick like a bullet, even though there was intended to be a bullet. You know, I channeled my Black Superman persona and didn't let those bother me and continued. I would implore the students of the University of Western to constantly be yourself, be confident, and keep on moving forward as I did. And right now, those same haters that had the comments, hey, I'm an Order Canada recipient, so they could just lap it up and like it right now.
Thank you, Robert. Have you thought about creating videos?
I didn't want to be the old guy in the video, so no, I haven't thought about that, you know, so I have to do it in a way that isn't you know, outdated, because I've seen some of my friends who are like 52 rapping in the video. I'm like, oh, that's a bad look. Right? So I definitely want to do things that are in sync with the times and stuff like that. And I was ever going to be creating any TikTok videos, it'd have to be something that's in sync with my age and who I am. So it's not off the table, but yes, I wouldn't be wanting to create educational videos that are stimulating and stuff like that, but in sync with my brand as well.
And I have one more question that's actually mine. Since we have so many people here that admire you and your work, what advice do you have for the participants who, like you, would like to combine Black history or history and art and want to be leaders in that field?
Yeah, well, you know what, I think that in order to be a leader in your field is, I think the ultimate combination is to really think about your talents and your field of endeavor that you're interested in, that you've learned about, and incorporate into either Black history or the upliftment of Black people. So consequently, if you're studying economics at the University of Western, think about creating a program that teaches Black youth about the need to be saving, or to be saving at an early age, and how that benefits you. Teach them about compound interest, teaching them how to save, for what the benefits are with respect to owning a house rather than renting for the rest of your life. You know, so those are things that you can incorporate from the degree that you have. Even if you spend 10% of your time, you know, if there's 100 black students at the University of Western in economics, and each of those individual 100 students that spend 10% of their time creating a program for Black youth that they did once every 10 days for the rest of their life, imagine the impact that those mere 100 students would have, let alone if you go into the humanities or criminology or sociology, right? If 100 Black people from all those disciplines just focus 10% of their time to uplifting the Black community, once again, the difference would be surmountable. It would really be incredible.
Amazing, Robert. And we have a question from our communication specialist, Nars. The question is, in your youth, you were the BSA president at University of Windsor. Could you talk about your experience as a Black student leader on campus, and how can university and college campuses support other young Black students to succeed?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I'm smiling because I have to edit some of my experiences down there because they weren't role model-like sometimes. But needless to say, like when I was BSA president and vice president at the time, you know, the one thing that happened when I was at university, we were protesting different things that occurred on the university and the community, you know, so we were very adamant about doing that. You know, like in Windsor and throughout Canada, but specifically Windsor I'm talking about right now, there was instances where the police would take, rather than take Black youth to jail, they would take them to parks and stuff like that and give them the option of what, hey, we can either take you to jail or we can beat the hell out of you. Which one do you want? And that was something that was happening in Windsor at the time that we were adamantly against. There's also representation in the faculty that we were adamant about while I was attending Windsor at the time. And consequently, you know, when I've been in contact with Western and other universities, that's still a battle to this very day. So, consequently, when I do these presentations, why I implore the Black students to become great in their future endeavors is because we can't have Black professors if we don't have Black people that have aspired towards those heights. That pool can only be so big if we don't implore our youth to get to those heights. So consequently, even though I've got a degree from criminology and sociology and a teaching degree, I've been able to merge those together in order to have something that, yes, I would say probably about 50% of my time is used to uplift the Black community, but I can't sacrifice my own personal self. And, you know, during Black History Month, I probably earn more in 2 months than some people earn in eight. So it's financially beneficial for me to continue on this journey as well.
Thank you for your answers, Robert. And we don't have any more questions, so I'm going to pass it to Leslie.
Okay.
I just have this vision of superheroes with the Order of Canada super suit, and you in one of those. So
yeah.
Again, going back to the haters, look at me now, superhero Order of Canada.
You know, the evil side of me actually is compelled to do that now. Now that you mentioned that, you know, I'll draw myself with the cape and everything. But you know, the funny thing is that there is the 18-year-old in me that still wants to do a comic book. So I do have the idea of creating that. So as long as I get the time and everything, so that's why I'm definitely going to do that before I'm that 80-year-old guy whose hand is switching and I can barely draw anymore. But I want to put out one last poster, right? So
yeah. Well, yeah. And my question was, what comes next after the Order of Canada? But you've already addressed that with the Afrotastic. That sounds amazing. So I think there's going to be a lot of great things, and I think we're going to see more visits from you to our campus, hopefully in real life one day. That would be
amazing. Definitely. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been to London, Ontario, so I definitely would like to return. That's for sure.
Excellent. Well, thank you again very, very much, Robert. That was excellent. We also want to thank the Department of Visual Arts for collaborating with us, and Central Communications, Joanne, Kate, and Alexi for all their help, and everyone, including our panelists today that brought this webinar together. And we wish you the best, Robert, and can't wait to see what comes next.
Yeah, definitely. And for all the students, look out for the posters on the premises of the University of Western. So once again, beyond Black History Month, they'll be up, right?
Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone, and take care.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Sheila.
Bye.